I'm Michael Salla. I was a former professor at American University in Washington, D.C. In 2001, I got very interested in this whole question of government cover-up of extraterrestrial life. And I have ever since been doing research on that. And this current research that you're about to watch on this video is featuring what I've discovered has been occurring in Antarctica, deep under the ice, that there has been a flourishing set of programs involving Germans that were able to escape to Antarctica just before the end of the Second World War, and US corporations that had been working with the Germans in developing advanced technologies for use in a secret space program that has been used for colonizing other planets, for being able to establish bases throughout the solar system. I'm very grateful to the organisers of the Empowered Light Holistic Expo for inviting me to be able to introduce this information to their audience, and I hope it helps them awaken to the truth of what's been happening in Antarctica and elsewhere around the world.
I'm Sue Greenwald with the Empowered Light Holistic Expo, and I'd like to thank Dr. Michael Salla for coming all the way over to Pennsylvania for this expo. Thank you so much, Dr. Salla. Take care.
Sue. Okay, all right. Thanks, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here, and good to see some old associates. A friend of mine, Pat Mercantilio, was the very first conference I ever attended discussing UFOs was an invitation to his Trenton, New Jersey. So I think he's having one in April of next year. So possibly, if the weather holds and if we don't have a revolution, you can go to that. So how many people here don't know who Groucho Marx is? Okay, you don't know. Okay, well, okay, you'll hear a quote. So Groucho Marx, he said that politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedy. Okay, so with that, what we're going to be doing is looking at where did all the trouble come from. We're looking way back. If you look at what's happening today, I mean, you can't say that America at the moment is not in a lot of trouble. You're looking for trouble, you come to the right place. United States in 2018, just before the midterms, was like, yeah, this is the definition of trouble. But when we look at this, analyze it, it goes back a long, long, long way. It's not recent. So this is what we're going to be talking about. How far back does all this trouble go that underlies the political situation on the planet that is really very important for us as we go through a process which might culminate or will culminate. Either it's going to be some global catastrophe or some planetary ascension. Really, we're going to go one way or the other. But I think we're going to go down the path of ascension. That's what it looks like. But in this presentation, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a society that went down the path of catastrophe. And they're our ancestors, our ancient ancestors. And that's where Enoch comes in. So I'm going to be talking all about that and giving you an idea of the history of the planet in terms of advanced intelligent life on the surface. So as far as, okay, how did advanced intelligent life begin on the planet? Well, people can differ on this, but I think when we want to find an answer to it, a good place to begin is here with the idea that between in the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars, whether it's a 500,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years, or millions of years, there was a planet there, a super Earth, a big planet, and it was populated with intelligent life. And that planet actually at the time, one of its moons was Mars, and as I'll talk a little bit later, our current moon, Earth, which is way too big to be a natural satellite of this small planet. When you compare it to Jupiter, the Earth should not have a moon as big as it is. That moon was also a moon, a natural satellite, or maybe an artificial satellite, of this planet here called Maldek. So we will be talking about that. So first of all, the exploded planet hypothesis, for those that are really interested in the science behind all of this. Thomas Van Flandern, he was the chief astronomer of the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And he was the first to propose the exploded planet hypothesis. And he came out with it around the year 2000. And I'll just kind of read it out to you. The hypothesis of the explosion of a number of planets and moons of our solar system during its 4.6 billion year history is in excellent accord with all known observational constraints, even without adjustable parameters. Many of its boldest predictions have been fulfilled. In most instances, these predictions were judged highly unlikely by the several standard models the exploded planet hypothesis would replace. And in several cases, the entire model was at risk to be falsified if the prediction occurred. The successful predictions included 1, satellites of asteroids, 2, satellites of comets, and he goes through a list of different hypotheses, and that at the very end, Mars is a former moon of an exploded planet. So that's the one we're going to be looking at, that Mars was a moon of this planet that once was in the asteroid belt. And this planet was a super Earth. But first we're going to begin with Mars. So let's look at Mars. So Mars may be a former moon of a now exploded planet. And so what Thomas Van Flandern did was he explained the different things about Mars, the way Mars behaves and its characteristics, that led to him concluding that it was a moon of an exploded super Earth, that there was a planet in the asteroid belt, where the asteroid belt is, and that it exploded. Mars was a moon of that, and because of Mars being so close to that exploded planet, it has the telltale characteristics of a planet that has undergone some catastrophic event from another planet exploding nearby it. So these are the characteristics of Mars that Thomas Van Flandern identified as being indicative that it was a satellite or a moon of a former super Earth in the asteroid belt. So Mars is much less massive than any planet not itself suspected of being a former moon. Orbit of Mars is more elliptical than for any larger mass planet. So he just goes through a number of characteristics. If you wanted to check this out online, you just check in exploded planet hypothesis. The northern hemisphere has a smooth 1 kilometre thick crust. South crust is over 20 kilometres thick. So basically what he's saying there is that the northern hemisphere of Mars actually has a crust which is much thinner than the southern hemisphere. So it's like the southern hemisphere was facing something and it was bombarded, and that led to the southern hemisphere being so much thicker. And so there's various isotopes to xenon 129, fission product of a massive explosion, has an excess abundance on Mars. So all these signs that there was some massive explosion that led to Mars actually being in its present location and also having all of these characteristics. So one of the hemispheres of Mars has a much thicker crust. The particular isotopes on Mars are indicative of some kind of massive explosion. And the size of Mars, it's not big enough to be a planet on its own, to have that particular orbit. So these things all led to Van Flandern coming up with the conclusion that Mars was part of a super Earth, a satellite.
So, well, how credible is this thesis? Well, one of the organizations that was very interested in Mars was the CIA. And the CIA got a team of remote viewers to look into Mars, look into the history of Mars, and find out what happened during some kind of catastrophe that occurred approximately 1 million years ago. So they identified that about 1 million years ago there was some catastrophe that Mars was associated with, and that there was intelligent life on Mars. And so they wanted to find out, you know, who these beings were, and, you know, how did they fare with this great catastrophe that impacted the entire planet. So that's an article on my website. If you wanted to just do a Google search or go to my website, you'll find the article, and that has the references to these CIA documents. So these this is an experiment that involved Joseph McMonigal, who was and still is a very prominent remote viewer, and he was a warrant officer for the US Army, which is a very senior position. And so he was part of the remote viewing team that the Army intelligence used for various projects before the program was cancelled and he left. So he was called in to do this remote viewing, and this is essentially what happened. He got a sealed envelope, and basically the envelope inside it had this information, which was the planet Mars, that was the target for the remote viewing. The time of interest, approximately 1 million years ago. So 1 million years ago, the remote viewing was focused on what they could learn about Mars at that time. So these geographic coordinates were given to the subject, which was Joseph McMonigal, during the remote viewing session. So this is a remote viewing experiment that the CIA actually commissioned. The subject is McMonigal. MON is the monitor. Okay, so that's the monitor. So the monitor just says, okay, gives him some preliminary information. Now, using the information in the sealed envelope, focus on, so he didn't know what was in the envelope. He's just a remote viewer, so it's a kind of blind. I think it was a double blind, because the monitor didn't even know himself. So he's like, and he's told to focus on the coordinates 40 degrees, 89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west. So he didn't know, McMonigal didn't know that this was on Mars. He just was given these coordinates. So he's thinking Earth at some point, not showing what it is. So he starts saying, I want to say it looks like, I don't know, it sort of looks, and so this is a verbatim report of the language that he used. So he's seeing a pyramid form. It's very high. It's kind of sitting in a large depressed area. So what area did McMonigal get instructions to remote view on Mars without knowing it? Anyone want to guess? Cydonia, exactly. Those were the coordinates. So he was given the coordinates for Cydonia, and the Cydonia was identified in the 1976 Viking mission, where you had the face on Mars, and you had Cydonia having these pyramid structures and other structures that looked like they were kind of ancient artifacts. So this is Cydonia, and the coordinates, this is the exact coordinates that McMonigal was given in the CIA remote viewing. So he's basically given instructions to remote view Cydonia 1 million years ago, or approximately 1 million years ago. So this is what he says he saw. Part of the dialogue was that there's more to the experiment, there's more dialogue, but I'm kind of fast forwarding here. Up to this point, he said that he saw people fleeing some kind of catastrophe, some planet-wide catastrophe. So the monitor says, okay, when the others left, these people are waiting. When the others left, how did they go? McMonigal, get an impression of don't know what the hell it is. It looks like the inside of a larger boat, very rounded walls and shiny metal. go along with them on their journey and find out where it is they go. Impression of a really crazy place with volcanoes and gas pockets and strange plants, very volatile place. It's very much like going from the frying pan into the fire. Difference is there seems to be a lot of vegetation where the other place did not have it, and different kind of storm. So he's talking about people evacuating some planet-wide catastrophe. There were those that initially left on some boat, on some kind of space ark, to leave the planet, and then when those space arks came back, they took whoever else was still alive and took them to a place. So where did they go? A place that was very volcanic, lots of vegetation, and kind of lots of storms. So where could that be? Earth. Okay, so at that point in time, a million years ago, whenever it is, the timeline, McMonigal said later that the timeline kind of got mixed up. So it's not clear whether it was 1 million years, 500,000 years, 50,000 years. It wasn't quite clear. But nevertheless, identified that wherever the Martians were being taken was a place that was very volcanic. So this brings us to the question, well, were the Martians that were fleeing this planet-wide catastrophe associated with Maldek, the exploded super-Earth, did they actually arrive in Antarctica? Well, one of the things about Antarctica is that it is very volcanic. I mean, this is something that was confirmed last year when they discovered, they've discovered approximately 40 volcanoes that protrude the Antarctic ice cap. But last year, using more advanced kind of radar penetrating technologies, they were able to identify an additional 91 volcanoes under the ice, making Antarctica the region on Earth with the highest concentration of volcanoes, more so than East Africa. Previously, they thought that East Africa had the highest concentration of volcanoes. Now they've discovered that it's in Antarctica, under the ice. So, was it Antarctica at a time in our Earth history when Antarctica was not in the South Pole, but actually in a more temperate region? And if you were there yesterday, I think most of you were there yesterday, you saw the kind of discussion I had about the pole shift, and Antarctica once was in an area of the planet that was free of ice. And certainly if you've followed the information that's come over the years from people discussing the Perry Race maps or the Orontius Phineas maps that show Antarctica being ice-free, it's pretty clear that the ancients actually knew that at one point in our Earth history, Antarctica was ice-free and navigable, and it was on the maps. So this is the question. So did the Martian refugees actually settle in Antarctica 250,000 years ago? So we're probably talking about waves of refugees. This is one of the questions that comes up from the Corey Goode information. Anyone not know who Corey Goode is? Okay, all right, so you all know his story. So Corey said that according to the information he got from these smart glass pads when he was on a 20 and back program, that he learned about Martian refugees settling in Antarctica, and that they arrived quite a long time ago. Now, the estimate for the date, that's an interesting one. Corey says 50,000 years. 55,000 years. I have the date here, roughly 250,000 years. So why did I have that? Why 250,000? Well, because that is what the ancient Sumerian records tell us. The cuneiform texts is the oldest historical documents that actually talk about the time, or the arrival of the gods. Because they talk about a time in Earth history when the gods arrived and brought civilization to the planet. And so the Sumerians were not talking about the Anunnaki. I think that is a kind of a misdirection, really. And actually, Corey, as you know, and David Wilcock have said that the whole Sitchin information is misdirection. So there's truth there, but it's not exactly how they depicted. So the Anunnaki didn't come from Nibiru, some planet out there that has a 3,600-year orbit. They came from Mars. Certainly Mars was one of the chief places of origin. So they came from Mars, and the Sumerian records identified 250,000 years ago as the time when the gods arrived and began sharing their advanced technologies and know-how, and helped Earth develop advanced technologies. And certainly the Sumerian texts say this is exactly what happened, that the Anunnaki, who rather than being from Nibiru were actually Martians, that they seeded the planet with advanced technology. So in the Law of One, that was channeled information that came from Carla Ruckert and Don Elkins from 1981 to 84. That talked about Martian refugees arriving on Earth. So the Law of One discusses this as well. So Ra says, the first of those to come here were brought from another planet in your solar system, called by you the red planet Mars. This planet's environment became inhospitable to third density beings. The first entities, therefore, were of this race, as you may call it, manipulated somewhat by those who were guardians at that time. So that's a very interesting statement there, because it's giving us the first hint of where the trouble began. The trouble began on Mars. The Martians brought their problems here to Earth. And the first Martian refugees that came here, they were also being manipulated. And kind of not unlike us, you have on Mars, prior to its destruction, you had your global elite. And there was a planet-wide catastrophe occurring, or about to occur. So who would leave the planet first, carrying advanced technologies? You got it, right. So they were the ones that came first, the global elite of Mars. And then the others came through whatever devices they could. If any of them had advanced technologies, they came through the advanced technologies, or others came through the discarnate process, reincarnation. So you got the Martians arriving on Earth either through ships that the elite had, arcs. Maybe there were some kind of Martian philanthropists that, like Noah, built space arcs to take some to safety, so you had that as well. And then you had probably the masses of the Martians arriving here through as discarnates, and then kind of going through the whole reincarnation process. So this gives us this gives us an idea of how the Martians got here. So it wasn't just the fact that the Martians arrived through this direct process from Mars through arcs, but also via the moon. That the moon was actually also an arc, and it carried refugees from the planet Maldek, and whatever Martians could find their way to this moon as well. So moon is artificial and arrived with refugees, so that's an article where I kind of first discussed this on my website, based on the information that Corey shared of what he encountered in these smart glass pads. So essentially the way it worked was that Maldek, there was some conflict between Maldek the planet and Mars, which was a large moon around Maldek. And there was some conflict, and during that conflict, Maldek gets destroyed. But just prior to its destruction, many Maldekians found their way to the moon. And so they find their way to the moon, and some of the Martians end up on the moon as well. And apparently what occurred was that the moon, after the explosion, the moon kind of found its way eventually into the Earth's orbit. So this is where we get some very interesting historical data actually saying that there was a time before the moon was seen in the night sky, or seen at any time at all around the Earth. In other words, that the moon is a kind of relatively recent arrival to the Earth. So according to Corey Goode, it's about, he says around 55,000 years ago, the moon arrived in the orbit around the Earth, and that's when you started to have some of the refugees from the moon land on the Earth to also start seeding a civilization. But Emmanuel Velikovsky, he said the period when the Earth was moonless is probably the most remote recollection of mankind. Democritus and Anaxagoras taught that there was a time when the Earth was without the moon. Aristotle wrote that Arcadia in Greece, before being inhabited by the Hellenes, had a population of Pelasgians, and that these aborigines occupied the land already before there was a moon in the sky above the Earth. For this reason, they were called Procellans. So this is information that comes from historical records, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, saying that there was a time when the Earth was moonless. So, this really does support what Corey was saying, that the moon is a recent arrival carrying refugees from this super Earth that exploded. And so here you have Emmanuel Velikovsky, Apollonius of Rhodes mentioned the time when not all the orbs were yet in the heavens before the Danai and the Deucalion races came into existence, and the only Arcadians lived, of whom it is said that they dwelt on mountains and fed on acorns before there was a moon. Plutarch wrote in the Roman Questions, there were Arcadians of Evanders following the so-called pre-lunar people. So, you get multiple historical references basically saying that the moon is a recent arrival. So the information that the astronomers give us that, the moon kind of naturally formed around the Earth is nonsense. That billions of years ago, the story goes that the Earth formed out of primordial matter that cooled in a present location around the sun, and that the moon was also made of primordial matter that just kind of like got attracted around the Earth. That's nonsense. The moon is too big for the Earth to attract it as a natural satellite. So something else happened, and the moon arrived as an artificial body. So how do we know this? I mean, is there any evidence showing that it's possible that the moon was some kind of giant planetoid, an ark, a space ark, carrying millions or even billions of people? Is it possible? Okay, well, there is evidence. Here's a story from Newsweek. It was published October 19, 2017, colonizing the moon. Scientists discover lava tubes that could house an underground city. So how's that? So now the scientific community is saying, well, actually the moon has these giant lava tubes. Well, just how big are they? How big are these lava tubes? Well, here is the city of Philadelphia, right here. Okay, how many people live in Philadelphia? I mean, several million, right? Look at that, several million. This is one lava tube on the moon. So you could have millions of people in one of these lava tubes in the moon. So this idea that the moon was a refugee base and was brought here artificially from this exploded planet, this kind of information really does support that. So now we get to Maldek. So what was going on? Maldek. What was the deal with Maldek? So the law of one, Ra says, the ones who were harvested to your sphere from this sphere known before its dissolution as other names, but to your peoples as Maldek, incarnated, many within your Earth's surface rather than upon it. The population of your planet contains many various groups harvested from other second dimension and cycled third dimension spheres. You are not all one race or background of beginning. The experience you share is unique to this time-space continuum. So what Ra is saying here is that with the exploded planet, Maldek, the super Earth, the souls, the intelligent life forms that lived on that planet, many of them found their way here, either through ships, either through the moon, or through the kind of discarnate process where somehow, as this planet exploded, their soul matrices ended up on Earth to go through the reincarnation process. But, of course, the souls that came here, whether they came through the discarnate process or via the moon or via kind of planetary arcs like the global elite from the Martians, these Maldekians all came here with the memories of what had happened on their planet, the memories of the conflicts. So, Groucho Marx had it right. So the trouble goes all the way back to these guys, the Maldekians. They arrived here and they carried with them not only their advanced technologies and memories of how to build these technologies, but also these ancient memories of conflict, of trouble. So the ETs arrive on the planet. They're refugees from this destroyed civilization on Mars, this destroyed planet Maldek, and also via the moon, which at one point was a flourishing moon of Maldek, but is now a kind of satellite where the surface has been pulverized, but under the surface you have these giant caverns with civilizations or many bases. So we have now the connection with Antarctica. So these beings, many of them start arriving here, and Antarctica seemed to be a desirable place for some of them. So why Antarctica? Why did the elite from Mars or Maldek? Why Antarctica? Well, according to Corey, he says that Antarctica was a place that attracted them because there was ancient builder race technology there, that there was a Stargate. So, if those fans of SG-1, raise your hand, you saw that. Okay, well, that's based on truth, that Antarctica does have an ancient Stargate dating back to millions, if not billions of years ago, that was built by some kind of super race or the builder race, whatever name you want to give them. So this was part of the attraction for Antarctica. Also, Antarctica was very volcanic, which meant that it had very rich soil and would be great for establishing a colony. At the time, North America and Europe was, the North Pole was over that, so Antarctica was very desirable. So this is where we get to the idea of the rule of the gods, that the first extraterrestrials that arrived on the planet, they were regarded by the indigenous hominids as gods. We would call them extraterrestrials, some people would call them angels, but for the ancients, they were called gods. And so this is something that multiple civilizations talk about. So you have the Egyptians, so Manetho, there are extracts from the books of Manetho. Manetho himself, a Greek historian, an Egyptian historian of Greek origins, wrote about the history of ancient Egypt going back 250,000 years ago, and identified the gods. Those original texts by Manetho have been lost, but fragments have been preserved in other historical writers. So this is what we know from Manetho. So from the Egyptian history of Manetho, who composed his account in 3 books, these deal with the gods, the demigods, the spirits of the dead. Okay, so, the gods, these would be the ones that arrived via the planetary arcs from Mars or Maldek. The demigods, these are the offspring, the kind of hybrid offspring of the gods. The spirits of the dead, so some of the discarnates from Mars or Maldek were also rulers, and the mortal kings, these were the last ones. Okay, who ruled Egypt down to Darius, king of the Persians. So up until Darius, king of the Persians, you had the gods, demigods, spirits of the dead, and then you had the mortal kings. After the gods, demigods reigned for 1,255 years, and you get another line of kings held sway for 1,817 years. Then came 30 more kings of Memphis, so those are the 30 Egyptian dynasties that is kind of well known in our history. So Manetho talks about this, the reign of the gods. And then we have the Sumerian kings list, and the same process. And you have, and this is where we get the dates. If you tabulate all of the dates of all of these gods that ruled, some of them for like 28,000 years, 26, 43,000. I mean, just how could anyone live that long? Are they talking about a single god? Are they talking about a group of gods? It could be, but nevertheless, this gives you an idea of just how far back this goes in our history. So you have these different cities founded by these different gods, and the total, if you go back in history, was approximately 250,000 years ago. So the rule of the gods prior to the Great Flood, that lasted over 240,000 years, and then you had that was followed by the demigods. That lasted up until around 3800 BC, and finally by human rulers. This is according to the kings list, the Sumerian kings list. Okay, so this gives us an idea of the history that our Earth was settled by these refugees from different planets who had a long history of conflict. And so they did bring their conflict with them. One of the things that Corey said was that the Martians that were on the moon were kicked off the moon, and that they settled on the Earth, and that the ones that were on the moon, the Maldekians, stayed up there, and they're probably still up there now.
David Wilcox said that the ancient builder race actually built the moon, and it was meant to actually almost be like a spaceship that they used.
Okay. Oh well, yeah. David has, and Corey has talked about the ancient builder race having built a kind of defensive grid for our local star system cluster of 52 star systems, and that this was something that the ancient builder race had built a network of defensive moons, and that the moon was part of this. So that's part of the information, that the moon is a satellite, an artificial satellite. So how does Atlantis come into all of this? So how does Atlantis figure into all of this? So we know Atlantis was a civilization that existed prior to the flood, to the Great Flood of approximately 13,000 years ago. Now, Plato said that Atlantis was a hub of advanced technologies that made it a global superpower before aggressive wars led to its destruction. So that's in the Critias dialogue. And Plato talked about a war between the ancient Athenians and the ancient Atlanteans. So obviously the Athenians had advanced technologies themselves at that time. And certainly this is, the Greek historians talk about this, that the Greeks had a golden age. But the Atlanteans and the Greeks had a war, so the Greeks and their allies fought off the Atlanteans, but nevertheless Atlantis continued to be a very aggressive, expansionist race that dominated the rest of the planet. Does that remind you of any country at the moment? Okay. Australia? No. So who could it be? Okay, so Atlantis. Could Atlantis have been an extraterrestrial colony? Well, certainly what we know is, according to Corey and Pete Peterson, who have said that they've both been taken under the Antarctic ice cap as part of these secret programs, that they actually got to see some of these buried spacecraft. And that there were 3 major spacecraft, and now the estimates range, from 3 miles to 30 miles. That's quite a discrepancy in terms of the diameter of these ships. But one of them was, as big as 3 miles according to Corey, 30 miles according to Pete Peterson. But these are very large motherships that crash landed in Antarctica, and they cannibalized these ships to set up an advanced society and a civilization whose technologies far exceeded anywhere else on the Earth, and that became a dominant power on the planet. So what we're talking about here is, could this have been the start of Atlantis? That Atlantis was established by these Martian refugees who crash landed there in Antarctica and established this super civilization. Well, that's the information we get from Corey and Pete Peterson. These authors, Rand Flemmarth and Rose Flemmarth, they wrote a book which actually puts together a very persuasive case that Atlantis actually is buried under the Antarctic ice sheets, that Atlantis was Antarctica in our ancient history. So, and they give some information about how Antarctica was ice-free up to 12,000 years ago, using the information from Charles Hapgood, and that a pole shift was responsible for the disappearance of Atlantis, the main colony in Antarctica. So Atlantis was a superpower that had colonies all over the planet. So Egypt was a colony of Atlantis. The Americas had colonial outposts of Atlantis, and that during the great catastrophe that Plato describes in the Critias, Atlantis was buried under the ice. Or submerged. I mean, Plato described it as being submerged by the waters. But what really happened was that Atlantis was submerged by the ice, because as it moved to the South Pole, then you had the ice beginning to accumulate, and then it got was buried under miles of ice. So this is what Plato was describing. So Atlantis is Antarctica. So the fall of Antarctica, the fall of Atlantis, how did that happen? So here we get Edgar Casey, who gives us some really helpful information about what happened to Atlantis. Why did it fail as a civilization? Why did it bring upon itself a global catastrophe? In Atlantis, we find the entity. So Casey was doing a reading for a client, and he always refers to the client as the entity. Strange language, but that's how he spoke. As there were those periods before the destruction when there were being continually waged what may be termed war. This was being waged between the followers of the patriarchs of old, of Alta, of Coada, and those directed against the sons of Belial. So here, what we have is Casey identifying that Atlantis, prior to its fall, there was a conflict, a major conflict. And that this conflict was the one that ultimately led to its destruction. And it involved the sons of Belial. Well, who are the sons of Belial? The sons of Belial, Casey says, were those that sought more than gratifying the satisfying the use of material things for self without thought or consideration as to the hardships and the experiences of others. Sound like anyone you know? Sound like anyone you know? I think we have some ideas. The other group, those who followed the law of one, had a standard. The sons of Belial had no standard, save of self. Okay, so, in a way, the conflict we are experiencing in our planet is a mirror image of the conflict that the Atlanteans had. And the Atlanteans were descended from the Martians, who had the same conflict. So Marx was right, Groucho was right. It was like, look for the sources, diagnose it correctly. And that's what we're doing here. We're diagnosing the problem correctly. We're diagnosing the problem. Where does all this conflict come from? It doesn't come from us. We've inherited it from the Atlanteans, who inherited it from the Martians and the Maldekians. So it's not really our problem. We're just kind of, dealing with someone else's stuff. Wow. Kind of, all of us have gone through the thing. How many of us have at some point realised that our own personal lives are a result of us kind of like eventually waking up to the fact that we're dealing with our parents' stuff. Anyone kind of realise that we're dealing with our parents' stuff? Well, as a planet, we're dealing with our ancestors' stuff. That's what's going on here. So the sons of Belial and Baal worship Baal. So Hebrew, devil, the Lord. The Canaanites worship Baal and held rituals at which children were burned for sacrifice. According to Wierus, this demon is the first monarch of hell and appears as a three-headed beast. Baal is cited in the Grand Grimoire as a commanding general of infernal armies. The pre-flood sons of Belial are today's equivalent to global child-sacrificing satanic cult associated with the deep state. Okay, so these are the same groups worshipping the same dark entities from whatever hellhole or demon realm that they conjure up in their satanic masses, but they've been doing the same thing for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So this is a very old problem. So QAnon on the Rothschilds and Satanism. So anyone not know who QAnon is? Well, just one. Okay, well, so virtually everyone knows who QAnon is, so just do a Google search, QAnon, you'll get it. Or go to this article and you'll get some kind of free information on QAnon. But QAnon spells out that there is an alliance here between Trump and Putin, which is generally called the Alliance. People describe this as the Alliance. Trump represents white hats in the US military. Putin represents this kind of Russia returned to a kind of a Christian heritage. And it's very interesting. I mentioned Casey. Casey actually said that Russia would be the hope of the world, that once it had outgrown communism, it shed itself of that totalitarian puppet masters, it would become the hope of the world. So that's what we're seeing now. Casey wrote about this, I think it was in the 1930s. So this is 80 years later. So we are seeing this come to fruition. Casey's prediction that Russia has now become the hope of the world. Well, this is why the Cabal is so dead set on these two guys getting close. From day one, Trump saying, well, let's talk with Putin, let's talk. It's like, no, and we all know about that history. So, but QAnon is telling us that the Rothschilds are the leaders of a global satanic cult, and that they are the principal adversary of this Trump-Putin alliance. And the article kind of gives you a little more information for you to find out about that. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the dark side has been doing, or who they are. Now, Casey also talked at length about the law of one, and he said, quote, "The entity was among those of the law of one who made their departure not only for the preservation of the material things, but for the preserving of the records that might eventually become a portion of man's experience in the earth, when there is the seeking into those realms within the inner self for a knowledge of its close relationship with the creative force." So it's all about going within and finding that internal guidance system for how to live life in accordance with this realization that we are all one. We are kind of like multiple, we are the one infinite spirit having multiple incarnations. Okay, that's the kind of realization that goes with the law of one material. So Casey was aware of this. The law of one, of course, in the raw material, This is what they say the law of one is. The law of one may be approximated by stating that all things are one, that there is no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love, light, love, the infinite creator. So, that gives us an idea of what the law of one is and how that dramatically differs from the philosophy of those that follow this kind of sons of Belial belief system, which is kind of like very hedonistic, gratification of self. So, Casey described, was the law of one. Ra described how Atlantis was approached by the Galactic Federation, just as we were approached by the Galactic Federation. The Galactic Federation approached us officially in 1954 when President Eisenhower went to Edwards Air Force Base and met with a delegation of the Galactic Federation. And Eisenhower, I think he was a good man, but he was surrounded by jackals, and the jackals told him to say no. And that's what happened. So, but the same thing happened with Atlantis. So, questioner, we have a condition where a large enough number of the entities, the questioner is Don Elkins. We have a condition where a large enough number of the entities of Atlantis had started at least going in the direction of the law of one and living the law of one for their call to be heard by the Confederation. This call was heard because using the law of one, it overrode the opposition of the Atlantean entities that were not calling, the sons of Belial. The Confederation then used channels such as we use now for communication and also made contact directly. But this turned out to be a mistake because it was perverted by some of the entities of Atlantis. Is this correct? This is correct. Okay, so basically contact was made with the Galactic Confederation, and eventually after the contact was made, there was some technology was shared, the information was shared, and then eventually it was perverted. So this actually fairly nicely mirrors what happened in Germany. In yesterday's talk, when I was talking about Germany, during the pre-war period, before the Second World War, the Germans were contacted by a positive group of Nordic extraterrestrials who shared some of their technologies and some of their know-how. And then in 1933, Hitler came to power. The Nazi SS kind of came in and took everything under its control and perverted it. So it was the same process. So now we get finally to Enoch. So who was Enoch, and how did he kind of figure into all of this? So Enoch was one of the pre-flood patriarchs. The Old Testament and a number of apocryphal texts talk about Enoch as being this one of the patriarchs who lived prior to the Great Flood. And we know historically from the scientific records that the Great Flood occurred approximately 13,000 years ago, or not, I don't know what it is in the Old Testament, 4,000 years, but the Great Flood actually occurred about 13,000 years ago. So this tells us who Enoch was. So it gives us an idea of Enoch. So one of the pre-flood patriarchs was Enoch. He was the son of Jared, and Jared was the founder of the Mormon Church. Jared is a revered figure in the Mormon Church, and the Mormons actually say that Joseph Smith was given these, I think, copper tablets or golden tablets with information going back to this era with Jared. So the Mormons actually have some information from this pre-flood era that's been stored on these copper or golden tablets that are buried in various places in the Americas. Resided in a region that had successfully resisted Atlantean conquest, as explained by Plato. So Enoch resided during the last days of Atlantis, during the era when it was riven by conflict and it was tearing itself apart because of the conflict between the sons of Belial and the followers of the law of one, that they had this conflict. And of course there was the wars with the ancient Greeks, and the Greeks, I think, had an alliance with whoever Enoch belonged to, whatever tribe. Today we would say Israel, but Israel didn't exist at that time. So Enoch, I believe, was probably part of a civilization that worked with the Greeks. He may have actually been an offshoot of the Greeks civilization at that time, who fought against the Atlanteans and successfully established independence. And Enoch was very likely a follower of this pre-flood religion called the Law of One, because that was the dominant ethical code at the time, the Law of One. So Enoch was an extraterrestrial contactee. He was someone that had encounters with the Galactic Confederation, or Federation, whichever term you want to use. So he was chosen by the righteous angels. So in the Books of Enoch, and I'll talk about the multiple Books of Enoch soon, it was discussed how he was picked by God, the supreme galactic ruler, whatever name you want to give him, the righteous angels, to be a witness to events that led to the fall of Atlantis and removed the fallen angels from global authority. So Atlantis had been corrupted. The information that had been brought in by the Galactic Confederation had been corrupted. The kind of connection to the ancient Martians, who had initially led to the rise of the civilization, that had brought in a lot of advanced technology, but it seems that something that was brought in by the Galactic Confederation kind of tipped the scales for the Atlantean civilization collapsing and leading to its corruption. So Enoch was chosen to be a kind of intermediary between these different groups of extraterrestrials, or using the terminology of that time, the righteous angels and the fallen angels. So Enoch talked about how he was taken to heaven, the galactic councils, the Council of Saturn, and of course Corey talks about the base just outside Saturn, also one just outside Jupiter, where there were these Council of Saturn meetings to discuss the future of Earth. So similarly, back during the days of Enoch, Enoch was taken to very similar meetings involving the Council of Saturn. And he acted as an intermediary between the different sides. So he was called upon to mediate between the fallen angels and the righteous angels. Multiple books of Enoch. Enoch was said to have written 360 books based on his interactions with different extraterrestrial groups and their advanced knowledge. And so this was information that he had written down, and he passed it on to his children, which would help his children. Methuselah was his oldest son, to restore civilization after the coming great flood. So basically Enoch got the advanced knowledge that the flood was coming, a catastrophe was coming, that there just wasn't enough people that were embodying the philosophy of the Law of One. So there was going to be a great catastrophe. And so this is the information you will need, he was telling his sons, that you will help seed the survivors of this great flood or this catastrophe with this information so that they can rebuild civilization. So out of the 360 books, only 3 are said to survive. And even those 3, we don't know which ones actually faithfully record the actual words of Enoch. So 3 books of Enoch. So the very first book was discovered or rediscovered in 1773 as a canonical text of the Ethiopian church dated to the 3rd century before Christ. So this was something that the Ethiopian church actually used as church canon, but that the other Christian churches didn't use it at all. It was part of the Apocrypha, or a book that was not acknowledged to be sanctioned scripture, that the Council of Nicaea around 340 AD had chosen, which books, which Christian books and which Jewish texts would become part of this Old Testament and New Testament, and so they excluded the Book of Enoch, but the Ethiopians didn't. So in this first book of Enoch, it discusses the conflict between the righteous angels and the fallen angels due to the latter's sexual depredations and sharing advanced technologies with humanity. So there was some conflict arising from the fallen angels sharing technology. So the problem was how to responsibly use advanced technology. Okay, so this was the main factor, or one of the main factors that drove Atlantis to ruin and precipitated the Great Flood. So, to me, it's a kind of mirror of where we are today. We have a lot of advanced technologies and they're being misused in these secret programs that we have no idea exist. And even though collectively we choose... I know that everyone here, you're not choosing to be asleep to this, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but the great mass, the collective, choose to be ignorant of this. But even though you choose to be ignorant of it, you don't escape responsibility. You're still responsible. So they collectively, the Atlanteans were responsible for the destruction because not enough of them woke up. We are going through a process of waking up right now. So the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. Enoch is described as both a witness and an intermediary in the conflict that led to the imprisonment of the fallen angels in a remote frozen region, Antarctica. So in the Book of Enoch, it actually describes where the fallen angels were taken by the righteous angels. In other words, where the negative extraterrestrials or the Martian refugees or the Maldekian global elite were taken. They were taken to Antarctica and placed in stasis chambers deep under the Antarctic ice sheets. So the Book of Enoch contains a lot of information about historical events that occurred before the Great Flood. The second Book of Enoch, this is a really interesting one. It was rediscovered in the 14th to the 18th century among old Slavonic manuscripts dated to the 1st century of before Christ. Enoch was taken to multiple heavens, occupied by different angelic orders to eventually meet with God or the Supreme Lord or the head of the Galactic Confederation. Enoch anointed by God, but fallen angels refused to bow. So in this, the second book, the Secrets, Book of Secrets, it describes how Enoch is kind of revered or given this exalted position by the Supreme Lord, by God, and but the fallen angels refuse to worship or acknowledge that Enoch is special or has any kind of special role. So this is very significant because it shows that Enoch may not necessarily just be an individual, but may actually be an office, kind of like the office of the presidency. We know with the current president, it's like, okay, you can be critical of the president, but you've got to be respectful of the office. So maybe it's something like this, that the fallen angels need to be respectful of the office of Enoch. So Enoch receives this dictation for 360 books of knowledge for safekeeping by his descendants. So this is our heritage. It's been, who knows, maybe the Vatican has it. Maybe we should get Newt Gingrich on the phone and get Celeste to go down there and find out where it all is. Yeah, so the Vatican might have some of these books. Enoch was told to instruct his sons in the moral principles and love. So ethics, higher ethics. Methuselah is chosen to establish a priesthood to safeguard the ancient knowledge. So that's very interesting. So Methuselah is establishing a secret priesthood where those priests charged with preserving this ancient knowledge dating back to Enoch. Methuselah's grandson Melchizedek is immaculately born and establishes the order of Melchizedek. So this is in the second Enoch, the Book of Secrets. So this is some of the ancient knowledge has been preserved by these secret orders that date back to this Enochian pre-flood era. The Hebrew Book of Enoch, Book 3, are the revelations of Metatron. So this comes from Rabbi Ishmael from the 1st century of the Christian era. He's taken to heaven in an ascension event where he met with Enoch. And so he talks about, Rabbi Ishmael talks about his encounter with Enoch and how Enoch has ascended to this kind of exalted state of Metatron. So who is Metatron? So I saw this photo or this drawing by one of the vendors here, Eva Sullivan, who wonderful artist. When I saw this, I really took a liking to it, and so I purchased it. And it shows Metatron. So Metatron is supposed to be the ascended form of Enoch. Okay, so the office of Enoch involves a being who occupies that office at some point ascending. Okay, so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So Enoch went through an ascension process and becomes Metatron. And so in this third book of Enoch, it talks about the revelations of Metatron. So Metatron is given all the secrets of creation, secrets of metallurgy and Merkabah mysticism, and the Merkabah is a space-time device that is accessible through higher consciousness. So those that are able to develop their higher consciousness are able to use a Merkabah vehicle or spontaneously generate one. So the Book of Enoch, the third book, actually gives information on how this can be done. So this is something that even in the 1st century AD, that the ancient societies, Jewish communities, Christian communities, they understood these principles. So the Merkabah, that's a kind of representation of the Merkabah. It's a space-time device, and it is designed to be able to take you wherever you desire to go. So that gives you a bit of a background now on the 3 books of Enoch and how they connect with Atlantis, Antarctica, Mars, and Maldek. And so the Book of Enoch, or the multiple books of Enoch, were basically generated to help those that were going to experience a catastrophic global event, help them rebuild after the event a global civilization that would be based on the law of one. So that was the idea behind Enoch. Now, I just wanted to mention J.J. Hurtak's book, because to me, reading it kind of it's very similar to what Rabbi Ishmael experienced in the 1st century AD in terms of being taken up into the heavens and having an encounter with Merkabah. For those of you who have read it, it's a very difficult book to read. I can't say I understand it. It's a very difficult book, but it describes very similar experiences to Rabbi Ishmael. In this case, Hurtak had this experience in 1973, and he's given 67 keys to cosmic knowledge. So for those that have this, maybe this gives you another perspective on how this connects with the earlier books of Enoch, the 3 that we know exist. So this could be a 4th book of Enoch. So the main issues in the Book of Enoch, they deal with events prior to the Great Flood that destroyed much of the worldwide Atlantean civilization. Emphasis placed on preserving knowledge to be used in re-establishing civilization in a post-flood world that would be free of the corruption of the sons of Belial, the satanic cult. So this is, going back to my friend Groucho. Okay, so Groucho, here's the trouble. Okay, that's the trouble, folks. So this is it. When you diagnose the problem, you can come up with the correct remedy. So the problem goes from these guys, which is some kind of, I guess, a demonic force, some depraved form of consciousness which is able to infiltrate and corrupt organizations and institutions. And we will have questions at the end of this, so you will have an opportunity to ask questions. So this is, so that's where the trouble comes from. So the roles of Enoch's descendants in surviving the coming flood, so they're responsible for passing on the physical and spiritual technology that would help rebuild human civilization. So Noah was given physical information for rebuilding humanity, an ark, genetics of all animals, and etc. So I think Noah, it wasn't a wooden flood that ended up on Mount Ararat in modern-day Turkey. I think it was something much more advanced, something that really was an advanced form of technology that Noah had built. And there were many of these that were built that were able to protect enough people to survive this the coming catastrophe. And they preserved all the genetics of the animals. Melchizedek was given the spiritual information. So this was going to be the spiritual order. Kind of like this was going to be something that would help the survivors of the Great Flood maintain a ethical code so that they could prevent a future catastrophe. So it's been a long time in preparing. So a pole shift happened 13,000 years ago. So that's where Atlantis or Antarctica gets buried under the ice sheets, and the real world rebuilds from the catastrophe, using a lot of the kind of technology that was preserved and the spiritual information that was handed down. So now we get to the part involving Corey Goode, because I think Corey is has a really fascinating information. I know when I first heard it, it was electrifying because it just resonated. It's so accurate with everything else that I had been studying for several decades now. And his information struck me as very, very significant then. And the more I study Corey's information and the experiences he's had, I've noticed a striking parallel with Enoch. Really amazing parallels here. And so that's what I'm going to do now, is talk about some of the parallels between the experiences of Corey Goode and Enoch, to kind of like better understand how does this all help us understand what we are facing today as a planetary civilization, as we are on the verge of some global event that's many predicted was going to be a catastrophe, but which I think most of you here in the room might accept is actually going to be an opportunity for something really wonderful and magnificent to happen, to lift us all up into a golden age. So let's look at this. So what are the parallels between Corey and the Enoch? So they both describe themselves as being intermediaries in a galactic spiritual conflict. So here you have a picture of Corey meeting with this really intimidating 14-foot tall royal Draco, right? So a little bit bigger than Andre the Giant, but certainly, and Corey described the kind of mental power of this being as being overwhelming. That was the experience, having a headache, suffering from a headache for several days after. But even though as powerful as this being was, when Corey was in touch with this being, that the being basically asked Corey to take a message to the Sphere Being Alliance. These are the Sphere Being Alliance. Of course, the 8-foot tall Blue Avian, as well as other entities that are part of this sphere being alliance, that this royal white Draco said, give them a message, and the message is, give me free passage out of the solar system, and you can do whatever you like to my lackeys and minions. No, I don't have any problem with them, right? And Corey basically said, well, you know, there was a communication, there was an interaction, right? So there was some messages back and forth. So there's history to that. And so in the same thing happened in the Book of Enoch. It says in the Book of Enoch, quote, go, say to the watchers of heaven who have sent thee to pray for them, you ought to pray for men and not men for you. So here Enoch is being told by one of the higher angels that the watchers shouldn't have been using him as an intermediary for them. They should have been the intermediary for him and humanity, that they had kind of reversed it. So similarly, this guy here, you know, has kind of like, you know, gotten it wrong. But nevertheless, there are striking parallels there. Similar modes of space travel. You know, Corey describes himself as being taken up in this kind of violet blue sphere that just kind of materializes in his room, expands and enfolds him and takes him. And also we have in the books of Enoch, the Merkaba vehicle, which also, when it's fully actuated, or it becomes like a sphere of light. So both are told about galactic history and Earth history. Enoch given knowledge about the heavens and different angelic and demonic orders from his angelic advisors and the Lord of Days. So he's given all of this information. So similarly, Corey says that he was given information, you know, the smart glass pads. He took in a lot of information from that. Then he met with the Anshar, and the Anshar gave him a lot of information, a mind meld, and also got to see the libraries of the Anshar. So he got a lot of information from the galactic about Earth history. So there's a parallel there between Corey and Enoch. I just wanted to mention also that Corey was given a download. He says that he was given a download by this entity called the Sentinel, that he was taken up and had this encounter, and the entity kind of downloaded a tremendous amount of information, like libraries of information, and Corey didn't want to be cognizant of that. He didn't want to kind of know it because he thought it would affect his family life. So he said, I don't want to know what it is. I think the question that was put to him, do you want to know who you were, who you're going to be, and who you are? And Corey said no. And he said he's been asked that question 3 times, I think, and said no each time. So he's taking his time. How many here would say yes first time? Okay, I think a lot of us would say yes the first time round. Okay. So this is the being he had the encounter with, the Sentinel. And so if Corey had said yes, the process would have begun for him similarly to Enoch. So Enoch went through a transformative process where he went from being an ordinary human who was a contactee to being some kind of angelic being. And Corey has kind of talked about this as well. He said that eventually he's going to go through some kind of transformation. You know, that's of course Metatron of Enoch. Could there be something similar to that? I think that's what Corey is talking about. As he goes through this process. So that's Metatron, and this was the Sentinel who asked him the question, you know, do you want to know who you're going to be, who you've been, and so forth. So both got to witness the fallen angels in Antarctica. Enoch got to be taken there by by the Galactic Federation or the Righteous Angels. He was taken down to Antarctica, where he got to witness where the fallen angels or the native extraterrestrials were imprisoned in stasis chambers. So Corey said he was taken down there to Antarctica, and he got to see some of the bodies of those that didn't make it into the stasis chambers. So these were the hybrids or the servants who weren't allowed into the spacecraft where the stasis chambers were. So the Martians went into the spacecraft, and that's where they continue to be now, in these spacecraft in stasis chambers. And I think this is part of the thing that we are part of the problem that we are facing as a civilization, is that the secret programs are trying to decide what to do about these Martians and what to do about the giants that work with them. So Antarctica, you can go to that article, and that has information about how Antarctica kind of fits the description in the Book of Enoch for this desolate place in the south that shined 24 hours a day. There's only one place in the southern region of the planet that shines 24 hours a day, and that's Antarctica, below the Antarctic Circle. What I found interesting in kind of like looking through the Book of Enoch was that the place that was identified as being likely where the fallen angels were buried corresponds to the Sentinel Mountains, right? And Mount Vinson, the Book of Enoch actually describes this mountain range of 7 mountains, and it describes one that towers above all the others, and that corresponds with Mount Vinson. Mount Vinson is the tallest mountain in Antarctica, and when it was ice-free, you could navigate right up to it. Right, so it's Mount Vinson. But what I found very interesting, which is circumstantial, because in the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels are described as watchers. So isn't it interesting that this where the watchers are buried is called the Sentinel Mountains? I just find that's a kind of circumstantial bit of evidence, but certainly interesting. So both Corey and Enoch are given information about Earth history. Here you have the download from one of the Anshar, Kari, who shared her kind of knowledge, and she's a priestess with this inner Earth civilization, and they learned about Earth history. And so similarly in the Book of Enoch, I mean, he wrote 360 books about Earth history and galactic history and ethics. So there's, again, another parallel. It's this deep knowledge of Earth history. Taken to witness cosmic events. So both are taken by these entities, extraterrestrials, to witness events that were significant for the age in which they lived. So Enoch taken to witness inequities conducted by the fallen angels, which culminated in a catastrophic flood event. So for Enoch, it was explained to him that he was to be a witness, that he was there to record all of the dastardly deeds of the fallen angels, of the sons of Belial, if we like, that he was to be a witness, and so that then he could go up to the galactic councils and be a spokesperson for the inequities committed by the fallen angels. So similarly, Corey is being taken to these different locations to be a witness to things. So he's been taken twice into Antarctica, where he witnessed the industrial sites that are buried deep under the Antarctic ice sheets, where they're building these massive fleets of spacecraft using slave labour. And they're conducting genetic experiments on captive humans that are taken from all over the planet. And I find it very interesting. I mean, people say, well, could there really be a German secret space program? If How many people have heard of David Paulides and the missing people from the national parks? Okay, just raise your hands if you heard of that. Okay, well, in a recent interview, he said, guess what the dominant ethnic group of those that are disappearing is? German. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so why are young German males being disappeared when they're visiting national parks in the United States, maybe in Germany as well? But why is that? Well, the German space program needs fresh blood. Okay, so that's what's going on. And, it uses forced labour. And if you happen to be an unfortunate German male wandering in a national park, you might find yourself down there in Antarctica. And now you're told that you are going to be an officer for the secret German space program and you need to behave as a good German would. That's the Fourth Reich stuff that I talked about yesterday. So another parallel, taken to the heavens, the Galactic Council's Council of Saturn. So Corey talks about this, having been taken to the Council of Saturn a number of times. First when he was with the secret space program, he went there just as an intuitive empath to detect deception for the Earth delegate. But then later on, he describes actually being taken there as the Earth representative to speak on behalf of, or to speak not on behalf of the Earth, but to speak on behalf of the Sphere Being Alliance, that he was the Sphere Being Alliance delegate to this Council of Saturn. And he talked about how, as a result of these meetings, eventually the Council of Saturn had decided to give Earth a kind of representative position on the Council of Saturn. So yes, so he's talked about that, and that's an article you can find on exopolitics.org, where I go into more depth into what Corey was discussing regarding that meeting. So, but Enoch himself describes having been taken to the higher heavens, where he got to meet these different very senior angels and then eventually God, the Supreme Lord, and basically decisions were made, and then he was part of the implementation of those decisions. Things like, you've got to go back, and you've got to go back to Earth, and you've got to spend, I think it was like 90 days teaching all of the things that you've experienced here, and then you're going to come back, stuff like that. So this is where we get to the idea that Enoch is not necessarily just the name of a person, but it's an actual office, the office of Enoch. Because Corey says he met Enochs from other worlds. These were beings that did just like Enoch did in the Books of Enoch, or what Corey is doing today. And they say that they describe a very similar process where they were contacted by the Sphere Being Alliance to help their planet shake off a tyranny, shake off this very evil influence that had imprisoned their world, that typically involved the corruption of their political elites, and that it was through the awakening of the masses that the elites could be removed from power, and then that planet could actually join the Galactic Federation. So this is one of the people who say that they experienced this. That this was, can't remember his name. Micah, that's right, Micah. Micah, yeah. So Micah was from one of these worlds, from one of the solar systems, from the local cluster of 52 solar systems that make up our local galactic cluster. So he was one of the beings whose world had been dominated by the Draco reptilians, but they freed themselves with the help of the Sphere Being Alliance and the Galactic Federation. And he's here now to kind of like share his information on how they did it and to kind of lend assistance. So in one of the meetings, and this replicates what Enoch says he experienced in the Books of Enoch, meeting the different angelic orders and figures from Earth's ancient history. So this is in the Books of Enoch. And Corey said the same thing, that he went up there to the Council of Set and met Micah and a group of others from the local star system, the local galactic cluster. So here's another parallel: veneration, respect from the fallen angels. So this kind of goes to the idea that Enoch is an office as opposed to an individual. And so in here you have the incident where Corey describes being taken on this Mayan ship, this mothership, and says that there was this reptilian-like being who was kind of like running amok on this Mayan ship. And when the being saw Corey, the being said something to the effect that, Raw Hanush is here. Okay, and just that moment, that distraction was enough for the Mayans to subdue this being. So this is the story that Corey gives. But what it illustrates was that this being had a certain kind of recognition of Corey as holding a particular office or a title of Enoch or Raw Hanush, which translates as the office of Enoch. That's what Corey says Rohanush means, which is fascinating because this is telling us that this is an office that people can acquire through whatever life choices that they make. They can be picked to attain this office, and then once they fulfill that office, then there are planetary events that are a part of the fulfillment of that office, whether the planet ascends or whether the planet implodes in some catastrophe. So this seems to be what the office of Enoch involves. It's there. Someone occupies this position of Enoch to help a planet go through or navigate through all the challenges of either catastrophe or ascension. So, warnings about future cataclysmic events. So here you have Corey talking at length about the great solar flash. And I'm sure, who hasn't heard of the great solar flash? Raise your hand if you haven't heard of that. Okay, the event. Okay, just a few of you don't know it, but essentially the great solar flash is a giant coronal mass ejection from the sun, where the sun, for a period of 3 days, goes into this kind of darkened period. It's like it's just one giant sunspot. And it goes dark. It appears dark. The sun's still there. It hasn't disappeared. It hasn't exploded. It's still there. It just appears to have just one giant sunspot. This giant coronal mass ejection will knock out all the electronics on the planet, and that can be a very, very bad thing. So he's been warning about that and saying that we are now, right now, we're in a solar minimum, and that the next solar maximum is roughly around 2013, 2014, something like that. And it could be any time between now and then that the solar flash can happen, and the event. This can trigger the event. So what is the event? We will talk about that very shortly. So that's what Corey's been fixated on. And of course, with Enoch, it was all about this coming flood, all about this pole shift that would lead to the planet reorienting and the oceans very rapidly rising because of the melting ice caps in the northern hemisphere, because the North America was covered by sheets of ice, and now with the pole shift, North America shifted to its present location, where maybe 13,000 years ago, where we are now would have been part of the great ice sheet. But now, obviously, whatever ice was here would have melted very rapidly, and that led to the Earth's oceans rising. So that would have explained the flood, because all the coastal cities would have been overwhelmed by the rising waters. So why are Antarctica's volcanoes activating? I talked about this yesterday. The region of the galaxy that our solar system is entering into is filled by cosmic rays, and that's stimulating the sun, it's stimulating the earth and activating the volcanoes. And so the volcanoes in Antarctica are being activated, and that's triggering a melt-off, a rapid melt-off. So here are all the volcanoes, they're being triggered, they're melting the ice from underneath, and this has been observed from NASA's satellites that show that over the last 50 years, West Antarctica has been heating up much more rapidly than Eastern Antarctica. And the only real explanation for that is that all of these volcanoes are being activated from beneath. So that's what's happening down there. And so we might experience a pole shift, that this might be part of our immediate future. We don't know how serious it'll be. I think it might be something which is not nearly as serious as what happened during the day of Enoch, because the pole shift was part of a great global catastrophe. For us, it might be a trigger for awakening. Okay, so I talked about this yesterday, Albert Einstein's quote. Did anyone not how many people weren't here yesterday? Just raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. I'll read it out again. So Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to Charles Hapgood's book, Path of the Pole. And in this, Hapgood basically described what would trigger a pole shift. And Albert Einstein wrote the foreword, summarising it and basically saying, in a polar region there is continual deposition of ice which is not symmetrically distributed about the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way will, when it has reached a certain point, produce a movement of the Earth's crust over the rest of the Earth's body, and this will displace the polar regions towards the equator. So, what we're seeing here is that as the ice sheets in West Antarctica melt, that the asymmetrical distribution of the ice increases. And so the centrifugal force that is generated by the ice sheets in the South Pole, at least, increases. So this is what's going to trigger a pole shift. So this is where now we arrive at the same kind of situation that Enoch faced back in the day, preparing humanity for an event. Now for Enoch, there really wasn't much of a response to this event that he was talking about, that the Atlanteans generally ignored this information, that they didn't change their path, and of course they experienced catastrophe. What we are witnessing now with Corey is he is disseminating information more of a kind of ethical or spiritual dimension to try and help us prepare for this event that is coming, for this, what it is that we are going to witness, whether it's a solar flash, a pole shift, or maybe both of those, that there's going to be some kind of spiritual preparation that's going to be necessary for this. And the more of us as a planet that prepare for this, the more the catastrophic elements of it is going to be mitigated. That's the key. The Atlanteans kind of weren't able to do it, but from what I'm seeing, there is a lot of positive kind of signs that we are going to be actually experiencing something very uplifting, and it's not going to be nearly as destructive as what happened back then. So preparing for the Ascension, Corey says that there were two sets of literature that he came across when he was in the secret space programs. And, with David, the emphasis has been on the Ra material, the Law of One. And Corey said in August 2015, I knew that some groups were ordered to read the Ra and Seth data, while in the programs, at the same time, I knew many groups were working to discredit both works. So, the sons of Belial were trying to discredit this kind of information, which is critical for preparing for what's to come. Now, I'm sure, I've already discussed the law of one, so we know a little bit about that. So what does Seth teach? Well, what does Seth have to tell us about service to other? Because service to other is, the key concept in the law of one material. If you become service to other, then you are going to, make the cut. You're going to ascend. You get that 51% service to other in your consciousness. If your consciousness is 51% of the time thinking about others and how to help others, then you make the cut. You're going to ascend. So Seth has a kind of different take on that. He says, quote, "When you are having fun, you are helping others. When you are not having fun and telling yourself that you are helping others, you're not helping them or yourself. So, having fun." It goes on. "When you're fulfilling the joyful nature of your being, you are helping yourself and you are helping others. When you help others because you think you must, but it goes against the grain, then they know it, and you inflict upon them the obligation that you have no right to inflict." End quote. So when I read this, I was really relieved because I didn't have to do what Mother Teresa did and open up soup kitchens and, wash people and all of that. It's like, oh man, that would be hard. I wouldn't enjoy that. You just do what brings you joy in life. What is, each one of us is different. We each have things that we love doing. And Seth says that the more you do the things that you love, you will naturally, out of that joyful state of being, help others find what it is that brings joy in their lives. It's just like, as you magnetize to that joyful center within, you will help others magnetize to that joyful center within. And that's how you can be of service to others. It's not by helping them, by setting up soup kitchens. I mean, that's good too. I'm not wanting to dump on people wanting to set up soup kitchens that's all very good. But really, the best way you can help another person, I believe, is to help them do the things that bring them joy in life. And that's what Seth is telling us. So that's how to be of service to others. So Seth was very helpful. Thank you. Okay. All right. So when will Ascension occur? When will the event occur? So this is something everyone is... we all have stories about this, information about when it's going to occur. Many of us thought it was going to happen in 2012. Now it's 2023. When is it going to happen? Well, I found something very interesting, and this was something my wife actually alerted me to, Angelica. So, kudos to Angelica for alerting me to this information. This comes from, there's a documentary. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called Deadline. It's from this Brazilian mystic, Chico Xavier. Anyone heard of Chico Xavier? Okay, there's a couple of you. Yeah, all right. So he's a Brazilian mystic, and he talked about the deadline, what is about to happen. So this is what he said. Quote, "Upon the arrival of man to the moon on July 20, 1969, occurred a meeting with the heavenly powers of our solar system to check on the progress of Earth's society. They decided then to provide mankind with a period of 50 years to evolve morally and coexist peacefully without causing a third world war. If up to the deadline they could do so, mankind would, from then on, be ready to enter a new era of its existence, and magnificent feats would be observed everywhere. And also our brothers from other planets would be expressly authorized to present themselves publicly and officially to the Earth inhabitants." So I found that interesting because 50 years from July 20, 1969 is when? Next year. Okay, interesting. Okay, another prediction, right? But this one's been around for some time. And that, to me, kind of like makes sense that if we could make it through 50 years of a Cold War where all of this really advanced destructive technology is available on the planet, then we could make it through the event, whatever that is. So what is the event? This is a something that this lady, Alison Coe, has, many of you heard of, anyone heard of Alison Coe? Just, okay, a few of you. She is a hypnotherapist, and she has been getting clients who have been talking about she gets clients to connect with their higher self, and she says that in the past, the clients would talk about, or the higher self of the clients would talk about their past incarnations and, why they're having so many problems now, because your parents, was your mother-in-law in another life, or was your boyfriend, was your torturer in another life, and so forth and so forth. She says that now the higher self is connecting her clients to the immediate future after this event, after the planet has gone through some ascension, and saying that now the higher self on the other side of the veil, or the other side of the event, is actually giving them information to how to prepare for the coming event. And the bottom line is to do what Seth was telling us, follow your bliss, do the things that you love. If you're stuck in a dead-end job, get out of it and do the thing that you really enjoy. So this is the thing, and she describes that new earth. And so finally, the last slide is this one, which I like to kind of focus on in terms of finishing lectures, because I've been involved in the kind of disclosure movement for since 2001 now, been discussing it, and a disclosure event is right around the corner. I mean, actually it's happening right now. We're having public disclosure. Official disclosure, that's going to take some time. It'll catch up, but public disclosure is happening, and as everyone experiences a disclosure event in their lives, or officially, when everything is disclosed and the truth comes out, and people learn about Germans in Antarctica, and that's where all the German boys that visit the national parks have been going. It's like, there they are, right? So it's like, okay, they're going to find out all of these things, and immediately there's going to be a lot of anger, a lot of shock, and that's where we need to come into these kind of states, because as we learn the truth, the more truth that we're ready to receive is going to be directly proportional to how forgiving we are. The more capable we are of forgiving those that committed dastardly things, the more truth we're going to learn. And it all depends on where you want to be. If you want to know the full truth, you need to be forgiving. Justice and mercy in terms of what is going to emerge in the future Earth as we go through this disclosure event, and as we encounter ascension. Justice and mercy. We need to be able to give amnesty to those that have been doing some terrible things, because that's going to reflect on us. Because in a way, we don't escape responsibility just because we've been ignorant. That we still have a degree of responsibility for everything. That the law of one teaches us, that we are all connected, and so we need to be able to find the balance between justice, where those that the really bad eggs are punished, exposed and punished, and we're merciful for those that were brainwashed. Because in many cases, it's like the Nazi prison guards. It's like, well, if I didn't do this, if I didn't fulfill the orders to be a prison guard, then I would have been shot on the spot, and my family would have ended up in prison. So I did it. So people that do dastardly things have a story too. So we need to be prepared to be merciful, and I think this is all part of how we deal with the Ascension event. So so that's it. And of course, I have the book out there. I have a few more copies. If you don't have it, we have copies, and I can sign those for you. So I think I have a little bit of time. Okay, maybe 15 minutes of questions? And I think we only have the one microphone, right? Okay, so I'm going to run up to you and say, give me your question.
Fabulous. So are you saying the Dracos are from Mars or the Anunnaki?
Okay. Well, the Draco, they come from Alpha Draconis, so they're a very imperial reptilian race. and they are the troublemakers. So they are the ones that kind of like infiltrate worlds and create problems. So they infiltrated Mars, they infiltrated Maldek, and were the ones that created problems on those planets that led to their wars, that led to the destruction. But the Martians who came here, I think they are the Anunnaki. They are the ones that the Sumerians talked about, that they are the ones that brought the advanced technologies, or one of the groups. There were probably many groups that brought advanced technology. Okay, anyone else up the front? Then I'll kind of wind my way up to the back.
Thanks, Dr. Salla. Two questions. One is I ran into Major Dames years ago, remote viewer, and I asked him to explain what happened when the Soviet Union sent up the probe, the Phobos 1 and 2, outside Mars, but he didn't want to discuss it. Do you know whatever happened to those two probes? They never came back.
Yeah, those two probes, the Russian probes were, they had some kind of satellite, well, they had some camera footage of something coming out of, I think it was Phobos, and actually shooting the probe down. So it was destroyed. So whether it was the secret space program, whether it was the Draconians or some other groups, someone didn't want the Russians kind of like putting surveillance satellites over Mars.
Thank you. And also, when they found in 1947 the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, the Dead Sea Scrolls, isn't that a lot like the Book of Enoch in certain respects?
Yeah, I think that was the third Book of Enoch was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the. It's also called the Hebrew Book of Enoch, or Book 3. By Rabbi Ishmael. Yeah, so and that discusses this conflict. Okay.
Thank you. Can you explain a little bit more about the Trump-Putin thing? I'm confused about all that.
Okay, all right. Well, Trump is very knowledgeable about the Cabal, the controllers of the planet, and he has been getting briefings about what the Cabal has been doing, and from the military intelligence community. And one of the things that he's been denied access to is information about how the Cabal operations are being conducted around the world. So one of the reasons that he wanted to meet with Putin was to get information about what the Cabal is doing, because the Russians know everything, and so that's why everyone was so upset that Putin and Trump met in Helsinki and actually got to spend private time together just with the interpreters. And you notice there was an uproar in the media. It's like, what did they say? We want the records, we want the transcripts. So it's like they want to know how much Putin told Trump. But Putin definitely is aware that there is a kind of a global satanic group that infiltrates and controls governments, which is why he has really been very calm in responding to many provocations against Russia, because he knows that the United States has been infiltrated, and so he's helping Trump free the US of this global control group that is trying to basically facilitate or have the United States go to war with Russia, which is what the control group wants to happen. But Putin and Trump really want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay?
This controlling group that you're talking about, the satanic group, they all do you agree that they also know about the coming ascension, and what they're doing to prevent it is to, our physical approach to the ascension is the pineal gland in the brain. They're attempting to stop this ascension by pharmaceutical drugs, genetically modified food, radiation from cell phones, and they're just trying to destroy the pineal gland. Do you agree that this group is trying to stop this ascension?
Thank you. Okay, that's a really good question, and it kind of raises a very difficult concept for a lot of people to accept, that the ascension process actually, there's an ascension process for the service to other polarity, which is what we're all doing, and there's an ascension process to the service to self-polarity, where basically the badder and meaner you are, and the more self-centered you are, the more likely you're going to make the cut. And for them, the cut, according to the law of one, is like 95%. So your consciousness has to be filled with 95% of kind of dark deeds and kind of trying to do negative actions and create pain and suffering, and that this is apparently your mission, and that you can ascend through that process, which sounds kind of bizarre, but that is actually in the Book of One. That actually does talk about that at great length, and those that are part of this kind of global satanic network say that's exactly right, that our job is to prevent as many of you as possible from ascending. And the more we can stop you from ascending, the better we do in our evolution. So it really is a kind of very bizarre thing, but certainly this is why it's so important for us to be in a place of forgiveness, rather than being hating people for doing this stuff. It's almost like the prison guard. It's like they're put in this situation. They're told, you got to be nasty to the prisoners, and if you're not, you're going to be treated. You're going to be thrown in there yourself. So they're doing these dark things, and it's because they're kind of trapped in that. And so the more forgiving we can become, the better for us, and the less likely they're going to actually succeed against us.
Well, you said that you're a Stargate person, then you should know about Baal because he's in Stargate. And I do believe that he's the destroyer. I do believe that in front of the CERN thing is a statue of Baal, and they just installed one in Washington, D.C. They're taking it on a tour from New York. It was installed in Washington, D.C., overlooking the Capitol right before the whole Kavanaugh thing. So it would seem easy to find if you could just find out who's buying these statues.
Okay, all right. Well, that's very interesting. So, yeah, exactly right. That Baal was one of the system lords in the Stargate series, and also identified as this demonic entity that is associated with the sons of Belial that brought down the civilization of Atlantis, and that continues even into our modern era. And I think the solution to that, it's like, at the beginning with Groucho, our friend Groucho, diagnosing the problem, or diagnosing where the trouble comes from, and applying the right remedy. So we've diagnosed the problem. That is, it's this kind of entity, or this force, this dark energy that kind of comes in and infiltrates civilizations and organizations. And this goes back hundreds of thousands of years. So, and what's the remedy? The remedy is, doing things like this, just getting into that place of forgiveness and mercy. Recognizing that we're all one, and that there's an ascension event happening here, and everyone has their role, and our role is to find that right balance between all of these things, so that we can not go dark ourselves, because, if you become fixated on revenge against those that are part of this global satanic network, then you are actually perpetuating that energy. You become part of the problem. The only way to become part of the solution is to step out of that energy of hatred and violence and just kind of self-interest, and just be in that place of joy and loving and being forgiving, and that's really the key for us to be ascending.
My question is, what is the difference between the event that's anticipated July of 2019 and then 2023? You noted July 2019, and then you noted 2023.
Well, there is no difference between them. These are just dates that are thrown out there for when the ascension is going to happen. So, as I mentioned, Chico Xavier, he believed that the ascension would happen in 2019. Alison Coe, according to the people that she's been working with, they also identified 2019 as when the ascension event is going to happen. So just think about that, because it's like, well, we're talking about less than a year away that this is going to happen, and things are really heating up. And 2023 is kind of like the window up until around 2023. So it can happen anytime between now and 2023. Corey said that it's a window, and that the solar maximum is predicted to be around that time, 2023, 2024, something there. And that's, so anytime between now and then is when the solar flash is going to happen. So and it might be a series of events. There might be a solar flash, there might be a disclosure event, there may be some kind of ascension event occurring that is out of sequence with those other things. So we don't really know how it's going to happen, but definitely I think the next year is going to be a really important one. And everyone here, I think it's wonderful that you're here getting this information, because you're now going to go out and you're going to, consciously or not, you're going to be ambassadors for this new energy. You're going to be out there talking and interacting with people, and the vibration and the energy is going to kind of be disseminated. So let's look at the time. I just wanted to, 5:45, so maybe just a couple more questions.
Thank you. I remember Corey mentioning a lot of these Dracos have nanites in them, and Putin said that probably the most important thing that's going to happen real soon is who discovers or who invents the most powerful super AI. And a lot of people conjectured that because these Dracos or Lizzies, whatever you want to call them, have a lot of nanites in them, that this dark AI is what we've basically been fighting for thousands of years. Have you heard about that?
Right, yes. So the Draco reptilians, they controlled themselves by this AI energy, and that may be what the kind of sons of Belial is driven by. That, is it a demon or is it a kind of AI signal? We don't know, but it's just what we do know is that people and organizations and civilizations have been corrupted by beings that often are somehow linked or associated with the Draconians in some way, and that these kind of satanic practices is a kind of symptom of that. So just one more question before we wrap it up. Okay.
So, the flood was supposed to get rid of all the bad people, right? But then it didn't, right? Because they're still around. So what happened? How did they survive?
Well, basically, the Great Flood got rid of the civilization or the organized political communities that formed civilizations, that these were kind of like decimated, and they had to rebuild again. And because typically the power elite are the ones that rule over these places, they were the first ones to kind of be eliminated, and the survivors, they would have to rebuild new civilizations, because the sons of Belial are very good at infiltrating organizations and and cultures and systems. They're very good at infiltrating and getting those positions of power. But when a civilization collapses, then there's an opportunity to start from scratch. So then you start again in building institutions and organizations, and you build using people that are of goodwill, and then it expands and grows. And the effort is to really stop the infiltration. Okay, so well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you especially for inviting me here to the Empowered Light Holistic Expo. So thank you, Sue Greenwald, for inviting me.